liftoff and the clock has started. Yes, sir. Reading you loud and clear.
Roger roll, Discovery.
Discovery, roger, very well.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and welcome to the April 24, 2019 edition of Space News. This is Peter Howard. Once again, I have Tina Stagg and Michael O'Diller with me from the Space Association of Australia. We'll start again with some more Australian space news. SmartSat CRC is set to become the largest Australian investor in space industry R&D. The Australian government has chipped in $55 million for the South Australian-based SmartSat Cooperative Research Centre, or CRC, a research organisation linking industry and research bodies to develop advanced satellites. As well as the government funding, 84 industry and research partners are contributing almost $190 million in cash and in kind. This makes SmartSat CRC the biggest ever Australian investment in the space industry research and development. The bid for government funding under the Department of Industry CRC program was developed by the University of South Australia and private company Nova Systems. Late last year, 6 CRCs were listed for funding, with SmartSat CRC the biggest winner. Bid leader and SmartSat's chief executive designate, Professor Andy Cronus, said the CRC would be a game changer for Australian space economy. Globally, space technologies and industries are worth more than $500 billion, but that success has been underpinned by serious global investment in research, he said. Australia has had a strong pedigree and long history in space, with excellent scientific capabilities in instrumentation and communication technologies, but until now the research has not been brought together to build a new industry for Australia and to capitalise on the exponential growth of the global space economy. Professor Coronos said that the new CRC would be headquartered in South Australia, but it was a national program that would involve some of the best universities in the country, as well as the CSIRO and Defence Science Technology Group. And over to Australia East. The New Zealand government has granted a 5-year lease for Rocket Lab's launch site. The licence is the first under the country's commercial space law, enacted in 2017, allowing the company to perform Electron launches from its private launch site on the Mahia Peninsula. The company also has launch licences from the New Zealand government and from the SAA in the United States. The company is currently performing rehearsals for its next launch, now scheduled for early May. And over to Tina.
Thanks, Peter, and good evening, space fans. In NASA news, an independent report has said it's infeasible for NASA to send humans to Mars in 2033. The report on the feasibility of such a mission, performed by the Science and Technology Policy Institute and requested by Congress in a 2017 NASA authorization bill, said even a mission to orbit Mars in 2033 cannot be realistically scheduled under NASA's current and notional plans, citing the time needed to develop required technologies for the mission. The earliest such a mission could be flown, according to the report, is 2037. The report was completed before last month's speech by US Vice President Mike Pence, moving up the date for a human lunar landing by 4 years, which NASA argues would also accelerate a Mars mission. However, those new plans do not appear to address the technology developmental issues identified in the report as a limiting factor in developing a human Mars mission. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said a revised budget proposal to carry out a human lunar landing by 2024 should be completed in the next 2 weeks. International partners, meanwhile, are uncertain about what role they will have in NASA's accelerated lunar landing plan. With many elements of the Lunar Gateway likely to be delayed or not needed at all, partners who plan to participate in the Gateway are privately questioning how they can take part and how to sell the revised architecture to their governments. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said at a press conference recently that he had met with partners and was aware of their concerns, but emphasised that international partnerships were still essential to NASA's long-term lunar exploration plans. Meanwhile, Lockheed Martin says it has a way to enable NASA to meet the goal of landing humans on the moon by 2024. In a presentation at the 35th Space Symposium the week before last, the company outlined its plan, which calls for the use of the SLS and Orion, a scaled-down version of the Lunar Gateway, and a two-stage lunar lander design. That approach would allow a crew of up to 4 people to land on the moon by the end of 2024, but the company said work on the landers would need to begin by early next year to maintain that schedule. The company declined to give a cost estimate of the new plan, but acknowledged it would need additional resources beyond the current NASA budget profile to carry it out. Michael.
Thanks, Tina. NASA's TESS spacecraft has discovered its first Earth-sized exoplanet. Astronomers said last week that they had observed a planet about 90% the diameter of Earth orbiting the star HD 21749. 53 light-years away. The planet orbits very close to its star and is likely too hot to be habitable. TESS, or Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, was launched a year ago to look for planets around stars as they pass in front of or transit those stars, dimming the starlight. Let's look at Russia. Russia's Defence Ministry is warning that debris from India's anti-satellite test could threaten the International Space Station. The head of the main Space Intelligence Centre of the Russian Defence Ministry said last week there were more than 100 fragments from last month's ASAT test which may create threats in the near future to the station. NASA has previously warned that the ASAT test increased the threat to the station, at least in the near term, although there's been no evidence that the station has yet had to take measures to avoid any collisions from debris created by that test. Let's move to China. China has announced plans for an asteroid sample return mission. The unnamed mission, still under study, would fly to the near-Earth asteroid 2016 HO3 and collect samples. The spacecraft would return to Earth with a canister detaching from the spacecraft to bring the samples down to the surface. The main spacecraft would go on to perform a flyby of 133P Elst Pizarro, an object in the main asteroid belt that also exhibits characteristics of comets. The mission, launching in 2022, would take about a decade to complete. Meanwhile, China will fly international payloads on a future sample return mission. The China National Space Administration says it will reserve 20 kilograms of payload space on its Chang'e 6 mission, split evenly between its orbiter and lander. The mission will land in the south polar region of the Moon to collect samples for return to Earth, likely in the early 2020s. Universities and private enterprises in China will also be eligible to propose payloads for the mission. Now moving to India. An Indian startup is the latest to get into the small launch vehicle market. Skyroot Aerospace, founded by 3 scientists formerly with the Indian space agency ISRO, plans to develop a series of vehicles named Vikram Sarabhai after the founder of India's space program. They plan to start with a small rocket they claim can be assembled and launched in a day, with a first launch in 2021. One challenge is that Indian law currently restricts the activities of private space companies, although proposed legislation would enable companies like Skyroot to operate without these limitations. Tina, back to you.
Thanks, Michael. In news from the United Arab Emirates, the UAE has named the astronaut who will fly to space later this year. The government of the UAE said Hazar al-Mansouri will fly to the International Space Station on a Soyuz mission in September for 8 days, becoming the first Emirati in space. Sultan al-Nayadi will train as his backup. The two come from a pool of more than 4,000 people who submitted applications to join the country's new astronaut corps. And to commercial news and SpaceX. In what appears to be a major setback for NASA's Commercial Crew program, SpaceX said a Crew Dragon spacecraft suffered an anomaly during tests of its Super Draco abort thrusters last weekend that would likely delay upcoming test flights. The incident at the company's Landing Zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station took place during a static fire test of the thrusters used as part of the vehicle's launch escape system. The company released few additional details about what happened, but a leaked video showed the capsule enveloped in a fireball, and a dark cloud of reddish smoke could be seen from nearby beaches. There have been unconfirmed reports that the spacecraft was completely destroyed in the apparent explosion. The capsule involved in the test is believed to be the same one that flew the highly successful Demo 1 mission to the International Space Station last month and was being prepared for an in-flight abort test that was scheduled for this northern summer. Clearly, any delay in that test would push back the Demo 2 flight, a test of another Crew Dragon spacecraft with NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley on board, currently scheduled for no earlier than July. And in further SpaceX news, the company is seeking to raise another $500 million in a new share sale. The new round, disclosed in a recent corporate filing, would sell shares at a price 10% higher than the previous round in December that also raised $500 million. Significantly, however, SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell said that while she was confident SpaceX could develop its Starlink broadband constellation, it was still an open question if that venture could be profitable. Turning to Blue Origin, Blue Origin will use a facility at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center to test its rocket engines. NASA said last week that it had signed a Space Act agreement with Blue Origin, giving the company access to Test Stand 4670 at the Huntsville, Alabama Center. Blue Origin will pay to refurbish the stand, which it will use for testing of its BE-3U and BE-4 engines it will produce at a factory it is building elsewhere in Huntsville. Back to Peter.
Thank you, Tina. And Virgin Galactic hopes to quickly move through the remainder of its Spaceship Two test flight program once it ends its current downtime. The vehicle last flew in February, and in an interview last week, Chief Pilot Dave McKay said Spaceship Two was currently in downtime to install the cabin that will be used on commercial flights, as well as make other modifications. Once done, he expects the company to complete the remaining test flights pretty quickly and then go into commercial service, but didn't give any dates. He and the other two crew members of that flight, Mike Masuki and Beth Moses, praised Spaceship Two's performance on that test flight. The three received their SAA commercial astronaut wings in a ceremony last week during the 35th Space Symposium. And over to Israel, SpaceIL says a chain of events led to the crash of its Beresheet lunar lander last week. The organisation said in a statement that a technical problem in a component eventually led to a shutdown of the lander's main engine during the descent. Specifically, it is believed that efforts to correct a faulty inertial measurement unit may have led to the crash. SpaceIL CEO Ido Attenbury said a command to reactivate the IMU caused a chain of events that shut down the lander's main engine. Attenbury said they could not restart the engine in time to salvage the landing attempt. The last telemetry from the lander showed that at an altitude of about 150 metres, it was descending at 500 kilometres per hour.
Wow. Yeah,
a bit out of control. Maurice Kahn, the billionaire chairman of SpaceIL, who contributed more than $40 million towards the development of the $100 million mission, said that work would begin immediately on a second lander. Indeed, meetings have since started to plan a second lander mission, including setting objectives and a budget. And that is all for this week's Space News. Thank you, Michael and Tina, and it's back to you, Andrew.